speculate about a bit later. To get an idea of what an insidious hold it has had upon us historically, we need to examine the idea of God. What is God? We often have a tendency to personify the impersonal. We talk of Mother Nature or Father Time. Of course, there is no actual Mother Nature, but the Earth's ecosystem on which we may put this human face does exist. This is the case with the concept of God. There is no God any more than there is a Mother Nature, but the creative principle of the universal system is an observable reality. There are laws to the way the universe operates that allow for orderly phenomena and for the evolution of more basic forms into more complex and capable forms such as ourselves. And onto this reality, for our own comfort, we put a human face. This may sound very cold, but we should remember that all the wonders of our world and the rest of the universe and ourselves are a product of the operation of these laws. And when we realize that these laws operate within human society in the form of love, then we can see that the identification of this mythical figure with a healing or comforting social phenomena is not inappropriate. But what of the concept of an angry God who asks us to subjugate ourselves to him? This is where the concept of the love of perfection as the root of all evil can best be understood. By the time the Judeo-Christian concept of God, differing greatly from those deities of earlier times, which often represented only certain aspects of nature or the human psyche, came into being, our society was profoundly neurotic. Civilization, i.e. repression, had been going on for a long time. A neurotic society is generally controlled by its most neurotic members, as long as they are still capable of functioning, because their insecurity makes the control of those less neurotic than themselves an imperative. When we are neurotic, we live in fear of the disowned part of our own nature, and, if unchecked, this fear can manifest itself as the desire to control those who express it or who represent it in the external world. For reasons which will be explained later, the human neurosis first appeared in males. It quickly spread to women, but in general, men tended to be more neurotic. And thus, as we and our society became more neurotic, men felt the need to take control and impose their will to an ever greater degree. Our societies, which in the distant past had been matriarchal because of the primacy of the reproductive role, became patriarchal. This is why God was conceived as not only a man, but an angry, neurotic, intolerant man. Because of the phenomenon known as projection, we create our gods in our own image, just as we see the world around us as a projection of ourselves. Paranoia is an important symptom of neurosis. We have a tendency to project the disowned part of ourselves, which we fear, onto others. For example, during the Cold War, capitalists saw in communism a projection of their own conscience, which told them that it was wrong to be greedy, and communists saw in capitalists a projection of their own unacknowledged awareness of the futility of trying to repress their greed through discipline. In a practical sense, fear of God was a way of maintaining the neurotic order of society. One might feel that a sick, miserable, evil society was better than no society at all. A collapse into unstructured barbarism. After all, some kind of structure was needed if we were to cooperate enough to develop science and learn to understand ourselves and our world better. But the major problem was that the root of the sickness was lack of self-acceptance. And by holding God up as an ideal of perfection, and preaching that humans needed to abase themselves before Him, the churches were making the sickness much, much worse. The view of God expressed depends on the individual. Since Jesus was clearly relatively free of neurosis, his concept of a loving, forgiving, and tolerant God was more in keeping with an accurate understanding of the functioning of a healthy system. Radical self-acceptance. Let's take a look at what self-acceptance means in practice. I'll use an example from my own life. When I was around 20, I went through a terrible depression. A new mother was staying in our house with her baby. At a point early in the depression, an image occurred to me of myself throwing the baby down onto the floor and killing it. In my imagination, those present didn't worry about the baby, but turned their attention to me and asked what made me do such a thing. At first I dismissed this thought, but it just wouldn't go away, and over time it came to obsess me, and I thought that I might actually carry it out. After the mother and baby left, when this was no longer a possibility, I continued to spiral deeper and deeper into depression. How could I even think about such a terrible thing? I asked myself. Surely I must be evil. There must be some horrible sickness in me. And the more I tried to find a solution to this problem, the worse it got. Since then, I've learned more about what we call obsessive-compulsive disorder, and discovered that this kind of thinking and the accompanying anxiety and depression are incredibly common. If I had simply accepted that this was something that my mind had thrown up, and that since it was a thought and not an action, it was morally neutral, the problem would not have occurred. By trying to be a good person and struggling with this thought, I only made myself miserable, and, as a result, for the time I was depressed, a more selfish person, and thus someone who took more from those around him than he gave. So accepting these thoughts would have not just been doing the right thing by myself, but also by others. We have limited control over what we think or feel. We do have some control. We can distract ourselves or learn disciplines such as meditation. But often this is not a good idea. The natural tendency in the mind is to seek wholeness. We can make ourselves miserable quite easily by clinging to ideas by an act of will, or trying to fight against the ideas and feelings which come to us unbidden. Armoring. So what form does this human neurosis take? The psychiatrist Wilhelm Reich wrote about a phenomenon he called armoring. According to him, there are two forms of armoring: body armor and character armor. The purpose of armoring is protection for what is inside and what is outside. Body armor involves the storing of repressed